A man begins to see, really see. He studies. He listens. He pieces together what others overlook, in silence, in solitude. He reads the symbols, the micro-expressions, the patterns behind the veil. He learns what the charmers never need to know and what the crowd never dares to confront. Now avert their gaze. The small talk feels brittle. Laughter becomes forced. And somewhere beneath the skin, he feels it. That bone-deep truth no one wants to say out loud. No. The kind of intelligence we're talking about here is the unspoken kind, the unmarketable kind, the man who sees too much. And then something strange happens. Doesn't worship femininity like a soft-skulled devotee. He notices the fracture in her voice, the shadow in her eye. He hears the subtext behind the compliment, and he doesn't flinch. Sometimes it's threatening. The deeper his mind goes, the colder the air becomes. The women who once looked at him with vague curiosity will make you more desirable. Watched it play out over months or years, becomes haunted by a quiet question. Intelligence in a man is not always attractive, but not just any intelligence. Not the functional kind that builds empires or makes money. That kind is useful, and usefulness buys tolerance. He doesn't smile on cue. Women say they want honesty, depth, presence, but give it to them, and most will squirm. Because here's the unutterable contradiction. What women claim to want and what their nervous systems respond to are not always the same. She may not know why she doesn't feel safe, but she doesn't. The nervous system. The female psyche fears what it cannot metabolize. And an intelligent man, truly intelligent, symbolically awake, is like an unshoed truth caught in the throat. Her body remembers the priest with too much knowledge, the trickster, the sorcerer in exile, the man who watched the goddess undress and didn't look away, and the man who knows that, who's seen it in their eyes, heard it in their silences. What am I becoming? If truth makes me repulsive? You see, there is a lie that still lives in the back of the masculine mind, that becoming more intelligent, more aware, more emotionally literate. But in reality, the opposite often happens. You wake up to the game, and suddenly you're disqualified from playing it. Not because you're cruel, not because you're broken, but because you're clear. And most people, especially most women, are not looking for clarity. They're looking for comfort, for the story, for the mask, not the mirror, not the man who sees past the seduction into the substructure, who sees the fear beneath the flirtation, the power beneath the softness, the ancient serpent coiled behind the smile. That man? He disturbs something ancient in her, something limbic, something tribal. This is not the rage of feminism. This is not politics. This is biology, mythology. He's not sexy. He's uncanny. And so he is left, as many men are left, brilliant, aware, deeply alone, staring across a chasm that no longer has a name. He cannot unsee what he's seen. He cannot go back to pretending he's impressed by TikTok dances and daddy issues disguised as sass. He can't nod along when she talks about energy and astrology and her divine feminine rising, while her shadow drips down her spine like black ink. He sees it all. She'll talk about vibes or something just didn't click. But what she really means is this, and she feels that. So she leaves. And what she say is vague. You see too much, and I don't want to be seen. That's the paradox. She wants to be adored, desired, understood, but only up to the point where the performance holds. Once you penetrate that mask, once you begin to see the child beneath the coquette, the wound beneath the beauty, the fury behind the flirtation, she becomes exposed. And exposure, to the feminine psyche, can feel like violence. One who sees just enough to play the role, but not enough to break the illusion, because illusions are delicate. They need a soft gaze, not a piercing one. So the man with eyes, real eyes, is exiled, quietly, consistently, not because he's unworthy, but because he's too worthy to lie. And women, most women, are not ready for a man they cannot fool. They say they want a real man, but what they mean is a safe man. Maybe you think too much, and if you look too deeply, you are no longer her lover. You are her mirror, and that she cannot bear. So you sit in the quiet again, aware, alone, numb. Part of you wonders if maybe you're broken. Maybe you're too intense. But no, you're not broken. You're just awake. And in a world trained to sleep, that makes you dangerous. Pause. There's a myth that echoes behind this silence, a whisper from the old psyche, long before dating apps and dopamine fasts. It's the myth of Actaeon, a hunter, sharp-eyed, alone in the forest, the symbol of feminine divinity, untouched, sacred. One day, by accident or fate, he stumbles upon Artemis, the virgin goddess of the moon, bathing, nude, unguarded. But Actaeon sees her, and that's the crime. Not touching, not speaking, seeing. She turns. Their eyes meet, and in that moment, something primal shatters, not in him, but in her. But as a fractured human being with wounds, manipulations, fears. He doesn't look away when she's unmasked, and for that, he must be torn apart. The illusion of her purity collapses under the weight of his gaze. And so she punishes him. She transforms him into a stag, and his own hounds devour him, begins to turn inward. This is not just a story. It's a map. When a man begins to see women, not as objects, not as ideals, not even as companions, but as symbolic forces, he awakens something dangerous in himself, projected outward, onto every flirtation, every curve, every rejection, every ghost. Actaeon is the modern man who pierces too deeply into the feminine, who sees the goddess not as mystery. By what? By his own instincts, his own appetites, his own hounds. That's the deeper irony, the intelligence that once brought him pride, a witness to her unconscious shame, her contradictions, her primal instincts she works so hard to spiritualize. And he starts to notice how much of his desire was never really about her. It was about his anima. Jung called it the inner feminine, the archetype of woman that lives inside every man. But for most, she remains unconscious. So when a man is rejected not because he's wrong, but because he's clear, he is not just witnessing female fear. He is confronting the limits of his own anima. You want her, not for who she is, but for what she represents. A balm, a forgetting, a return to mythic sleep. Because for the intelligent man, the painful truth is this: no woman can love you for your awareness. If that awareness dismantles her illusion, she doesn't want your insight. She wants your attention. She doesn't want to be studied. She wants to be felt. She doesn't want a mirror. She wants a stage. And when your mind is sharp enough to cut through performance, you become, in her nervous system, not a man, but a threat. The sacred whore, the innocent seductress, the boss babe child, you see it all. The flesh proxy for a psychic wound, and because of that, she cannot stay. But the deeper agony? You still want her. Even as you watch her recoil, even as you hear her say, "You're too much, too intense, too in your head." That's the hunger you can't name. The anima inside you longs for union, but not with her. With wholeness, completion, eros. But the body doesn't know the difference, so she becomes the symbol. And when she leaves, or worse, when she stays and grows cold, you don't just feel rejection. You feel collapse. The ego crumbles. The story cracks. And underneath it all lies the unbearable truth. You wanted her to save you from your own sight. Because to see clearly, without love, without warmth, without hope, is not liberation. It is hell. But it is a necessary hell. The Stoics knew this. They called it apatheia, not apathy, But the stillness beyond desire, beyond illusion, is free, beyond attachment to how things should be. Watch his dreams of romantic redemption bleed out at the altar of what is. Marcus Aurelius wrote of death constantly, not out of morbidity, but out of clarity, because the man who dies before he dies. And so too must the intelligent man die, symbolically. He must watch his anima burn, watch the illusions collapse. Only then can he return, not as a supplicant, not as a seducer, but as something colder, wiser, no trophy for seeing truth where others see comfort, more sovereign. But this transformation costs, and the world doesn't clap for it. There is no applause for inner clarity. In fact, the more you awaken, the more you are punished. Not by women, not by the world, by your own loneliness. Because when you stop projecting divinity onto the feminine, the magic fades. The Eros that once pulled you into devotion becomes a ghost. And all that's left is what's real. A body, fragmented, looking for safety. The man who has seen too much, who has suffered the exile of awareness, becomes, paradoxically, the only man truly capable of love. Deeper, quieter, no longer flung on to every passing face, but held, honored, integrated, a voice, a human being. Frightened, just like you, and yet you still crave her, because the anima never dies. She just retreats. And that's the strange reversal, because he no longer needs it to heal him. He no longer turns women into medicine. He no longer trades performance for intimacy. He simply sees without flinching. And if she can remain in that gaze, if she can stay, despite her own unraveling, then something sacred might return. Not illusion, raw, unspectacular, not infatuation, but presence, real, the kind of intimacy that does not seduce, but reveals, the kind most never experience, because it requires a man who has been through the fire and chose not to close his eyes. There's a moment that comes quietly, after all the noise dies down, after the chase ends, after the rejections have blurred together, and even the victories feel hollow. It comes not with thunder, but with stillness, like a cold wind through the ruins of something you once called love. You're sitting there, alone, again, and this time you don't reach for the phone, because you already know what waits on the other side of the screen. More masks, more patterns, more feminine fragments echoing the same performance. Seduce, test, retreat, blame. And in that stillness, the final realization settles in like ash. It was never about you. Not really. Her fears, her desires, her father wounds, her ancestral hunger for safety wrapped in danger. You walked into a theater with no script and were punished for not knowing your lines. You were just a stage for the unconscious to act itself out. And yet, you still walked out of the fire with your eyes open. That's what makes you rare. Not your knowledge, not your cleverness, but your refusal to look away, even when it costs you the one thing every man quietly craves: connection. See, most men are not rejected because they're bad or weak or stupid. They're rejected because they refuse to wear the right mask. Because real connection, the kind you ache for in the marrow of your bones, requires risk. Not the risk of heartbreak, but the risk of truth. And truth is the one thing most people, especially most women, are not built to handle in a man. Not because they're evil, but because truth disrupts safety. And the feminine, by nature, seeks safety like a flame seeks oxygen. She needs the illusion of control, the fantasy of emotional leadership, the myth that she chooses. But an intelligent man, a truly awake man, doesn't ask for safety. He isn't safe, not because he's violent, but because he's real. And reality is dangerous to those living in dreams. So you become the shadow, not the cartoon villain, but the Jungian shadow, the part of the psyche everyone wants to disown. You remind her of what she's buried, her own chaos, her own need for control, her own manipulations, her quiet disdain for the man who won't play her game. And the shadow, once revealed, must be cast out. So here you are, not broken, not bitter, but aware. And now you face the final choice, the one no one speaks of because it ruins the entire modern romance narrative. Do you want to be desired? Or do you want to be free? Because you cannot have both. Desire in this world is traded in masks. You perform, you withhold. You play just dumb enough, just charming enough, just masculine enough, and she plays along, pretending not to notice the blood behind your smile. But freedom? That costs everything. It costs the performance, the approval, the female gaze. He cannot be manipulated, cannot be seduced by validation. He sees the game and does not play. It costs being understood, because the man who is truly free, not just in word, but in soul, is terrifying. He may be wanted, but he will never be needed. And that's the ultimate heresy. But what she really means is that you are real, and realness doesn't fit the algorithm. Because women, especially today, are not looking for partners. They're looking for scripts. And you, my friend, tore up the pages. So she walks away, claiming you were too much. It doesn't look good in selfies. It doesn't text back on time. It doesn't fake enthusiasm for trauma disguised as spirituality. It doesn't comply. And you're done complying. Not out of spite, but out of truth. You no longer confuse attention with affection, seduction with connection, control with intimacy. You no longer chase what recoils from being seen. You simply sit in your solitude, not as punishment, but as initiation. The wise man does not run from his exile. He builds his kingdom inside it. And if one day a woman comes, not as a mask, not as a myth, but as a mirror, and can sit in that truth without flinching, good. But if not, you remain whole, because this journey was never about getting her. It was about remembering you. The man beneath the ache, beneath the need to be liked, to be kissed, to be chosen. The man who sees and does not close his eyes. The man who lost the world and found his soul. Now you know. I read all of them. Every story, every fracture, every unspoken confession. So sit with that. And if this stirred something you can't quite name, something ancient, something true, then speak. Not to be heard, but to remember. Drop your thoughts below. And if you're still watching, still feeling this, then subscribe. Not to follow me, but to walk beside the others, the quiet ones, the thinking ones, the exiled ones, the men who see, and stay awake.